On the day of Nicholas II's coronation, it shone as a symbol of an eternal empire. Nearly 5,000 diamonds, a crown over the fate of an entire people. And then it disappeared. It disappeared for decades. Some say it was hidden. Others say it was sold. Today, it is back in the Kremlin. But is it really the real thing? Or is it just a copy? What happened to the Russian Empire's main crown after the revolution? And why does no one want to say where it has been all this time? On the 14th day of May, in the year 1896, the weather in Moscow was clear and cloudless. An unusual silence reigned in the streets, as if the capital itself had held its breath. On this day, something greater than a mere celebration was taking place. It was a ritual symbolizing the connection between generations, the legitimacy of power, and the mystical unity of the monarch with the state. It was then that the last coronation in the history of the Russian Empire took place. Nicholas II became emperor and autocrat of all Russia. The symbol of this power was the grand imperial crown. It was made in 1762 for Catherine II. Since then, it has been placed on the head of every new monarch. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a distillation of the mythology of power. The crown contained almost 5,000 diamonds and a huge spinel weighing 65 carats, surrounded by pearls. Everything about it, its shape, symbolism, even its weight of almost 2 kilograms, emphasized its significance as a sacred object. The ceremony took place in the Assumption Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin. Empress Alexandra Feodorovna stood nearby, and according to the old rite, Nicholas placed the crown on his own head, confirming his divinely ordained power. Priests offered prayers, and the crowd held its breath as it watched this ritual, which was supposed to symbolize the eternity of the empire. But even then, as historians would later say, there was a feeling of heaviness in the air. Nicholas was young, withdrawn, and made no secret of the fact that he did not feel ready for the role of supreme ruler. He confessed to those close to him that he was ascending the throne out of duty, not out of inner calling. Many noticed that the new imperial couple seemed to be surrounded by an invisible wall, their gaze fixed not on the future, but on the past. The crown itself, glistening in the rays of the Moscow sun, seemed not a symbol of the beginning of a new era, but of the decline of an entire civilization. It was a farewell to a ritual in which precious stones were not just decorations, but signs of sacred power. At that moment, no one knew that the empire would fall in less than 2 decades, and that the fate of the crown itself would become one of the most mysterious secrets of the 20th century. After the ceremony, the crown was taken back to the Kremlin, where it continued to be kept, at first glance, in complete safety. But this safety was illusory. Ahead lay a revolution in which not only crowns would disappear, but also the heads of those who wore them. When Nicholas II abdicated in February 1917, the history of the Russian Empire, at least in its monarchical form, came to an end. But with the collapse of the throne, a new and no less dramatic process began. The disintegration not only of the state, but of the entire symbolic system on which it was based. One of the main victims of this collapse was the imperial regalia, artifacts that for centuries had symbolized the power, divine right, and grandeur of the Romanov dynasty. At first, everything seemed relatively orderly. The provisional government that replaced the Tsar, formally considered itself the guardian of the legacy. The regalia, including the Grand Crown, remained under guard in the Kremlin. Their location was recorded, registers were kept, and security was not withdrawn. But at the same time, chaos reigned in the country. The army was falling apart. The government was rapidly losing influence in the regions, and museums and repositories, especially in Petrograd, were becoming vulnerable to looting and pillaging. In October of that year, when the Bolsheviks seized power, the situation changed dramatically. From then on, all items associated with the monarchy were perceived as symbols of the old regime, subject to either dismantling or reinterpretation. However, the new authorities had a different understanding of the sacred. Gold, diamonds, and relics were valued not as symbols, but as valuable assets that could finance the revolution, war, and industrialization. The crown, the scepter, the orb, all became part of a larger question. What to do with the Tsarist legacy? Destroy it? Hide it? Sell it? Or preserve it as museum exhibits, a reminder of a past that must be forgotten? In 1918, after the execution of the royal family in Yekaterinburg, a real struggle for the treasures began in the corridors of Bolshevik power. Of particular interest were not only the regalia, but also the jewels belonging to the Empress and her daughters. The most incredible rumors circulated about secret vaults, bags of diamonds sewn into corsets, and currency taken to Switzerland through intermediaries. At the same time, the first large-scale seizures and requisitions began. Special commissions were set up in Petrograd and Moscow to take inventory. Many items, including unique works of jewelry, were seized. Some of them were sent to new institutions, such as the People's Commissariat of Education or the newly created Gokran. All this was accompanied by the destruction of palaces, the closure of museums, and waves of looting. The Russian imperial crown was hardly mentioned in the press during this period. It seemed to have disappeared from view. There was not a single public announcement or photograph. It was important for the Soviet authorities to erase the images of the old regime from the people's memory, along with the symbols that embodied it. This meant that even then, the crown may have been not just locked away, but doomed to disappear. In the chaos of the Civil War, amid the fronts scattered across the country, the Red Guard detachments, the White Armies, and foreign interventionists, the Bolshevik authorities began centralized work to systematize and inventory all that remained of the imperial luxury. This was not just a campaign to collect trophies. It was an attempt to take control of the symbols of the old era and transform them into resources for the new one. As early as 1918, the Ministry of Finance established the Gokran, the state repository of the Russian Republic. Officially, it was supposed to store gold, precious stones, jewelry, and any other valuables confiscated from enemies of the people. But in reality, it became a new stronghold, not of power, but of greed. Regalia, including the Grand Crown of the Russian Empire, were transferred there through a complex chain of acts, commissions, and secret orders. Archival records mention that as early as 1921, a commission on museum collections began actively collecting objects of decorative and applied art of exceptional historical and material value. Among them were items from the Hermitage, the Armory, private collections, and, most importantly, from the Diamond Fund. The crown, orb, and scepter were examined by experts. Among them were famous jewelers such as Agathon Fabergé, the younger brother of the famous Carl Fabergé. Their task was to determine the authenticity and quality of the stones, and, most importantly, to estimate their value. Many experts later admitted in their memoirs that they felt uneasy. They did not know whether all this would be preserved or sold off. Every stone was threatened with disappearance. In 1922, an official inventory of the Diamond Fund's valuables was carried out. The list was staggering in its scale. About 9,000 items, including the crown, scepter, orb, throne, order insignia, and empress's jewelry. All items were numbered, described, and photographed. This act was both a manifestation of bureaucratic meticulousness and, ironically, the last official confirmation of the existence of the original crown. After that, all traces of the items were lost. Some remained in the Diamond Fund, some were transferred to museums, and some disappeared. Many of them would resurface a few years later in Paris, London, and Berlin at closed auctions and in private collections. As for the crown, its existence is confirmed in the Gokran lists, but there is no precise information about where exactly it was kept from 1922 to 1967. This period is a dark tour. Dark zone. In the history of Russian symbols, the archives are silent. There are no photographs. The reports contain only routine mentions, as if everything were in order. But this silence does not sound like peace. It sounds like hidden anxiety. What if what is listed as the crown of the Russian Empire is no longer what it once was? The early 1920s in Soviet Russia were marked not only by chaos, famine, and repression, but also by an extraordinary phenomenon, the Maiko, parallel of the national heritage. The new government, in need of currency, literally opened the doors of the treasuries, and jewels that had been considered sacred for centuries began to disappear at a rate comparable to the fall of the empire itself. The main operator of this operation was the same Gokran, now acting not as a repository, but as something between a pawn shop and an auction house. Streams of gold, diamonds, and works of art passed through it. Sales were particularly brisk during the Preberpuits. Nepsti Einaun Anain my Lime period, when currency was vitally needed to purchase equipment, food, and pay off foreign debt. The Romanov regalia was under threat. The archives contain information that in 1924, tiaras, brooches, and necklaces belonging to the empresses were sent to London. Some of them are still in private collections, and lots marked Russian imperial provenance periodically appear at Christie's and Sotheby's auctions. It is believed that some of the items were transferred directly through the Torgpredstva, Soviet trade missions abroad. They operated semi-secretly, selling valuables through trusted individuals. For example, it is known that one of the diamonds from Empress Maria Feodorovna's headdress surfaced in Paris in 1927 and matched the description of a stone from the Gokran inventory. As for the Porn, Grand Imperial Crown. This is where speculation and rumors begin. The official version is that the crown was recognized as unique and inviolable and left in storage. However, there are no photographs confirming its preservation in the 1920s. Unlike the scepter and orb, which were at least occasionally mentioned in museum documents, the crown disappeared from circulation for almost 40 years. One researcher, jeweler Viktor Voronov, suggested in the 1990s that the original crown was cut up and its diamonds used in separate deals. According to him, this was technologically possible. The design allowed for disassembly. This hypothesis is indirectly confirmed by the fact that the inventory books of the early 1930s do not contain a precise description of the weight and composition of the stones, as if the item no longer existed in its original form. There are also mentions that some of the crown's doubles, Exact copies made for rehearsals of ceremonies or exhibitions could have been passed off as the original. Such copies were made while the imperial court was still in existence. One way or another, the fact remains. During the years of mass sales of relics, the fate of the main crown of the Russian Empire is shrouded in mystery. All we know for sure is that at some point it disappeared from view, and no one knows exactly what happened at that moment. Or perhaps someone knows, but has remained silent until now. According to the official version, the Grand Imperial Crown was confiscated, described, placed in storage, and several decades later returned to the Diamond Fund exhibition. But the further we get from the events of the 1920s, the more questions, inconsistencies, and suspicions arise. A veritable cloud of alternative versions has formed around the crown, each of them like a piece of a historical detective story in which silence remains the key clue. One of the most popular versions is Tsitsith, substitution. Proponents of this hypothesis claim that the real crown was either sold or destroyed, and the Soviet authorities ordered a copy to replace it. Theoretically, this is entirely possible. Fabergé and his associates had workshops capable of recreating the design down to the smallest detail. Some argue that in the 1920s or 1930s, such a copy could have been made for the purpose of disinformation to avoid scandal within the country and abroad. Another theory is evacuation. During the Civil War, when the White Army left Crimea, Odessa, and Sevastopol, some of the treasures were indeed taken away. General Wrangel, Prince Yusupov, and other members of the aristocracy took paintings, icons, and jewelry to Europe. Supporters of this version believe that the crown could have been among these shipments. According to rumors, it ended up in London, where it was melted down or hidden in the closed vaults of the Bank of England. This hypothesis gained particular popularity in the 1940s, when American journalist Charles Grayson published an article claiming that the U.S. holds a unique Russian imperial regalia, the origin of which is questionable. Although he did not name the items, researchers assumed that he was referring to the crown. Later, the trail led to the Rockefellers, who allegedly bought Russian valuables in antique deals. Another version is that the crown was divided. According to some reports, as early as the 1920s, there was a plan to monetize large items, including their physical dismantling. This applied to the scepter, the orb, and even the thrones. Considering that the crown contained several kilograms of pure gold and thousands of stones, it could have been divided into parts, the stones sold off, and the base melted down. Traces of these stones may still live on in the rings, tiaras, and necklaces of European nobility. The topic resurfaced in the 1990s when one of the jewelers of the Diamond Fund, who wished to remain anonymous, stated that the current crown on display differs in design from the one he studied in archival photographs. He mentioned a different type of fastening, a different angle of inclination of the dome halves, and differences in the fastening of the pearl ring. These details were impossible to notice with the naked eye, but the specialist, who had worked with jewelry techniques for decades, insisted that it was not the original. Finally, there is a conspiratorial but fascinating hypothesis. The crown is abroad, not sold, not melted down, but hidden. It is allegedly used as a points symbol of power in secret circles claiming to be the heirs of the Russian Empire. According to this version, the regalia is not just an object of art, but an artifact with sacred value, passed from hand to hand among those who consider themselves the legitimate successors of the dynasty. Of course, none of these versions has yet been officially confirmed, but the fact that the period from 1922 to 1967 remains completely shrouded in mystery is alarming. There is not a single photograph, inventory record, or document that reveals the exact and reliable fate of the main symbol of the Russian Empire. This makes the crown, or its absence, one of the most mysterious historical losses of the 20th century. After the turbulent 1920s and the turbulent 1930s, when the fate of the imperial regalia hung in the balance, a long period of Soviet silence followed. From the late 1930s until the end of the 1960s, not a single open source, publication, or museum report mentioned the imperial crown. It seemed to have disappeared into the depths of storage rooms, out of time, out of reach, out of sight. During this time, Gokran continued to exist, serving as the state treasury. The Diamond Fund, as a structure, also continued to operate. However, the exhibitions available to visitors were strictly limited, and a significant part of the collection was kept in secret basements and special storage facilities. According to researchers, this is where the crown could have been placed or hidden, or, conversely, where a fake could have been hidden. It is curious that during the Stalin years, the cult of kings was used selectively. Peter the Great and Catherine the Great were regarded as effective rulers, but no attempts were made to rehabilitate monarchical symbols, coronations, rituals, thrones. All of this was considered bourgeois rubbish and was not to be shown. Any symbolism of the empire was feared as a potential channel for hostile ideology. An atmosphere of secrecy and fear reigned inside museums. Employees who had access to valuables signed non-disclosure agreements. Archives were sealed, photographs were confiscated. Any research related to imperial symbols was subject to strict censorship. Historians who attempted to raise this topic often faced undesirable consequences, ranging from publication bans to dismissal, and then, in 1967, during the so-called Khrushchev thaw, and already under Brezhnev's rule, an unexpected event took place. A new exhibition of the Diamond Fund was opened, in which the Grand Imperial Crown was put on public display. This was a real sensation. For the first time in more than 40 years, the people could see what had previously been preserved only in legends. However, this event was accompanied by some oddities. No official explanation was given about the fate of the crown over the past years. No museum employee could explain exactly where it had been from the 1920s to the 1960s. All documents from this period are either missing or unavailable. The official position is that it was kept in a special storage facility. But even a visual inspection raised questions among experts. Jewelers, restorers, and art historians began to notice small differences. A slightly different angle of the halves, a different setting of the pearl, differences in the engraving on the base. All this could be explained by restoration. But according to official data, no restoration had been carried out. Thus, a new wave of doubt began to emerge in society. What exactly was shown to the people in 1967? A genuine imperial relic? Or a magnificent, skillfully crafted copy, designed to fill a gaping hole in the national memory? Today, more than a century after the fall of the Russian Empire, the Hartitontor Grand Imperial Crown remains the center of attention, not only as a museum exhibit, but also as a poids-du symbol of historical uncertainty. Despite being on display in the Kremlin's Diamond Fund and having been seen by millions of people, the question of its authenticity remains open. Immediately after the exhibition opened in 1967, and especially in the post-Soviet period, researchers, jewelers, and historians began comparing archival descriptions, photographs, and technical data of the pre-revolutionary crown with what is on display today. They discovered a number of differences. Firstly, there are discrepancies in the pabertide shape of the base. The original crown had a smoother curve, while the current one has a sharper angle. Secondly, there are differences in the pabertide mountings of the pearls and spinels. According to archival photographs, some pearls had a characteristic matte finish and minor damage, which are not present in the modern crown. This could be explained by restoration, but according to the Foundation's management, no official restoration took place. Secondly, the date of the crown's return to the exhibition raises questions. Why 1967? Why not earlier, during the Stalin cult of greatness? Why not during Khrushchev's thaw, when the Tsarist heritage had not yet become taboo again? This mysterious silence, lasting 40 years, is like a veil covering main story. There are alternative versions that continue to stir the minds. Some claim that the real crown has long been in the UK, in the private collections of the British aristocracy. According to these rumors, in the late 1920s, a secret operation was organized through Tallinn and Copenhagen to transport valuables, which was supervised by foreign agents and the remnants of the white émigré community. The source of this information is a World War II intelligence report that was declassified only in the early 2000s. Other hypotheses are more exotic, from Masonic societies, which allegedly sought to destroy symbols of Tsarist power, to the highest circles of the Soviet nomenclature, which, according to one conspiracy theory, used the crown as a personal, magical artifact, a relic that brought power and influence. There is no evidence to support these versions, but their popularity indicates one thing: the public does not believe the official story. The scientific community is also divided. Some researchers, including experts from the Hermitage and Gokran, insist on its authenticity, citing microscopic analyses of the metal, historical continuity, and the technical impossibility of creating an exact copy in those years. Others point out that the same craftsmen who created the crown worked in the 1920s and 1930s, and theoretically, they could have recreated it with high accuracy. Either way, the true fate of the crown remains unknown. What we see in the Kremlin may be the original, or maybe it's a symbol that was recreated to cover up a historical loss. There's no answer, and maybe there never will be. This is a special paradox. The crown, meant to embody absolute power and order, has become the most mysterious symbol of an era where only one thing reigns: silence and mystery.